my January 2024 market analysis for ETH, SOL, Celestia or TIA, and BTC. Look, markets haven't moved much since the approval of the Spot Bitcoin ETF, and many are wondering what's going to happen next. Well, I'm going to share my breakdown where crypto markets will go in the short and medium term with a focus on ETH, SOL, TIA, and BTC. Welcome back to another episode of Web3 Academy, your one trusted source to capitalize on the next big phase of the internet. We are here to make sense of an on-chain world in constant transformation. I'm Kyle Reedhead, your host for today's episode. And if you like this content, please follow on whatever platform you're listening on, and also like, comment, or give us a review. This is what helps us grow. Speaking of helping, let's gauge some market sentiment among our listeners here at Web3 Academy. If you think that markets will go up, or if you think they're going to go down by the end of Q1 2024, which is exactly what I'm going to talk about here in this episode, but I want to know, what do you think? Many are predicting a local top with the Bitcoin approval, and some think it's very bullish. Please answer the poll if you're listening on Spotify, and comment if you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube. Comment bullish or bearish in the comment section below. All right, friends, well, let's get into this breakdown. Look, I've just got a bunch of thoughts on the market, and I just wanted to get it all out of my head and download it into yours so that we know what's happening here in the coming months early on in 2024. I've talked a lot saying I think this is a very bullish year overall, but what's going to happen early on in this year? That's what people are wondering, and not much has happened over the last week. So everyone's wondering, are we going up or are we going down? Let's dive into that right now. All right, so quick recap. Bitcoin is sitting at 4,300, up 1.5% on the day, but down 8% for the week, which is crazy because we just had, 11 or 9 Bitcoin ETFs approved, and many were thinking it was going to be a bullish event. It looks like it was a bit of a sell the news event, but I mean, 8% is really nothing in crypto, so I don't see this as a massive move by any means. If we look at Ethereum, though, Ethereum is at 25.5, so 2,558, up 1.8% on the day, and actually up 9.5% on the week. Can you believe that? A Bitcoin ETF gets approved, and yet Bitcoin is down 8%, and Ethereum is up 9.5% on the week. We did call it here on this channel. We said that the approval would be bullish for Ethereum. So if you were listening on our YouTube channel or part of our pro reports in the newsletter, you would have been all over this. And so exciting to see. It was a tough few days just before leading up to that approval. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the ETH BTC chart in just a second here. But yeah, wild week. And now I think markets don't know what to do, right? We've kind of just been stuck here going up and down, but not much has moved. There's been a few tokens that have ran. SOL had a bit of a run just the other day. SOL is currently sitting at $96.81, by the way. So up almost 3% today, but basically flat on the week. So it's gone up, it's gone down. It doesn't really know what it's doing. One of the big winners, though, has been Celestia, which just continued to run up. And that's the token TIA. I'm going to talk about that because that's been a big one that I think a lot of people are interested in and curious about. And so I will touch on that this episode as well. But first, let's just get started in the BTC ETH BTC ratio. I want to cover this because this is something we've talked about a lot and have covered a lot on the show. And there's just been some very interesting happenings in this chart. I want to dive into that a little bit. Let's go into the monthly here. By the way, if you're listening on the podcast, it's fine. I'll explain everything that's happening. I'm currently sharing my screen though and reviewing some of the charts here. Let me just zoom in on this. So this has been a wild ride for the ETH BTC ratio. I've been talking about it a lot, and there's two patterns that we've been tracking. One is this big wedge that's about a 7-year-long thing that we've been watching, and then there's this like range that we've been trending in for a number of years now between ETH and Bitcoin. And so just before the ETF approval, I mean, for the last year and a bit, Bitcoin, since the merge, Bitcoin has been outperforming ETH. Okay, so on the ETH BTC chart, it's been going down and down and down, meaning Bitcoin has been winning. And it reached the bottom of this sort of big wedge that I've been covering for a while now. And for the last couple of months, it sort of hit off it, but continued to not go below it. And then we had, just the week prior to the ETF approval, the ETH BTC chart fell way below this wedge pattern. It actually made a weekly close below the blue wedge pattern here that you can see on the screen. And people were getting very concerned. It was like, if we close below this on the monthly, we are going to just drop big time. Also, what happened at the same time is not only did we come out of that wedge, but we started to hit the bottom of the trend pattern that we've been going on, which was basically 0.049 all the way up to 0.088. And we hit the very bottom of that. And so if we closed below that as well, that would have been very, very bad for ETH BTC. I talked about this, I think, on the Market Watch last week. Anyway, ETF got approved and ETH absolutely jumped, went nuts. Not only did it jump off the bottom of that range, it also popped back into the middle of the wedge pattern. And so now it looks extremely bullish. So things look really, really good. Now we still need a monthly close here. So we're waiting for the end of January to see what really happens. But it looks like we basically bounced off that trend line, jumped back into the wedge, and now are looking really good. And what it looks like is we'll probably hit the top of this wedge once again, which would be 0.067 on ETH. If we break through, we're probably going up to the top of the trend, which is 0.088. And then who knows what happens after that. As I've said for a while now, my assumption is we break all the way through that. And I think ETH outperforms from here on, at least through the cycle. Not sure exactly what happens after the cycle. We'll have to see how ETH's roadmap plays out and what goes on with L2s and all the other things that Ethereum is launching and its adoption, etc. So far, we've done very well on this. It was looking a bit scary, but things look pretty good. So let's talk about the ETF and what's happening here. People are a bit confused on where things go. One thing to note, a lot of inflows have come into crypto. Up on the screen here, I have the weekly crypto asset inflows chart, which is a CoinShares chart. It's looking at the ETFs, but it's also looking at some of the other crypto plays on traditional exchanges. We've shown this chart a bunch, and we had just a massive week. It's like a 4x, maybe even a 5x any of our recent weeks. So it's been a big inflow into crypto, of course, over that last week. Part of that was pre the ETF. There's a bunch of money coming in, and then also the ETF itself had a ton of flows. Of course, we've had up over hundreds of millions, actually 1.81 billion last week. So overall, a really good week for flows into the asset class. We've also had people selling things like the Grayscale Bitcoin ETF. You know, people have been locked in that for years. So there's been some selling as well. And then a bunch of people who own Spot Bitcoin ETF or not ETFs, Spot Bitcoin and levered Bitcoin, as well as other assets who have been selling since the approval. They basically made this trade months ago that bought, not on traditional exchanges, but bought real Bitcoin and decided to sell that when the approval went. So we're sort of in this stage where there's a bunch of people selling out of their old trade and and some new people coming in. What I really think is happening is I don't think there's a bunch of people flooding for this ETF right now. I think that BlackRock and some of them had clients that were ready to buy as this thing got approved. But then after that, I think we're going to sort of die out for a little bit. And I'll explain why in just a second. But one thing that I think that is interesting just to keep in mind is this is an asset that doesn't have an increase in its supply, right? So every other ETF, like gold, for example, when that got approved, the more demand that comes in ETF and the more the price of gold that goes up, the more profitable it is to mine it. And so actually the supply increases as the price of gold increases. That's not true of Bitcoin. And so it's a very different ETF than we've ever seen. And so when this demand really does start to come in, I think we're going to see some massive price movements on Bitcoin and ultimately the entire crypto ecosystem. So it is coming. And I mean, there's some math that you can do in terms of net inflows and what that means. So just for example, right now we've seen 300 million a day of net inflows into Bitcoin ETFs. That means about 7,000 Bitcoin is being bought. And just to keep in mind, there's only 900 Bitcoin that's mined every single day. So there's a supply demand crunch that's coming at some point, but when will that be exactly? We don't know. There's obviously a ton of supply on the market. Some people are selling. So you got to give time for that all to work out. But let's talk about this ETF for just a quick second. What people aren't grasping is, yes, there will be demand for Bitcoin. And I think we will see that because of all the marketing that these Bitcoin ETFs are doing. And then also you have all these financial advisors that work at BlackRock and all these other companies that will go to their clients, other financial advisors that work for banks, that work for private companies, etc., that will go and they'll shill this Bitcoin ETF because they can make money off of it. But you got to understand that that doesn't happen right away, right? This takes time. If you think in the real world, what's happening right now? Okay, this thing's approved. A lot of these BlackRock and other advisors are just learning about it, or they've learned from, the team at BlackRock, etc. But now they've got to go set up meetings with their clients. That doesn't happen in one day. They've got to go and take their clients out golfing. They've got to set up the nice restaurant dinner sessions at, the high-end restaurants in New York City, wherever else. This takes time to set up these meetings, to talk to the companies, to talk to the advisors. And so it's weeks to months where the demand will start to come in. It's not a daily thing, right? This isn't an immediate thing. You got to forget the bull case euphoria you have in your head and think, oh, actually in reality, people got to go learn about this stuff. They've got to go talk to their clients. And that takes time to set up those meetings, especially around the new year. And so I think this is a months thing before we start to see the real demand come in. And so we got to give it time. It's not a thing that's going to happen immediately. And so this is why I think we don't necessarily see a massive inflow today or even the next few weeks. I think it probably takes some time. And so I think we might actually just bounce around. I don't think Bitcoin does very well over the next few weeks. There's just no real catalyst for it right now. Inflation came down a little bit in terms of core inflation, but actually up in CPI. And so like macro, there isn't like a huge catalyst. I don't think we see a decrease in interest rates anytime soon. And by that, I mean in the next couple months, probably a Q2 thing, maybe. And so there's just not a big catalyst for Bitcoin yet until that demand starts to roll in. And that'll come over time, slowly and gradually, and then more and more and more. And so again, I think Q2, Q3, Q4, we do really, really well. I just think it takes a little bit of time for the Bitcoin ETF demand to follow through. Where the catalyst does come right now and why I think the ETH BTC ratio has done so well is there's a few things. So one, the next thing that everyone's looking at is the Ethereum ETFs, right? All eyes are on this. I got a picture up here. What is there? There's 7 ETFs that are currently have been filed for Ethereum. And the deadlines for these are not until, so the next one, so VanEck, ARK, and Hashdex all have a May deadline, a final SEC deadline for them to make a decision. BlackRock isn't until August, and then Grayscale's is in June. But what I think matters here is that same idea as what happened with the Spot Bitcoin ETF is they're all going to get approved at one time if it gets approved. And so likely what happens is the approval will come on the first final deadline, which is May 23rd. If they don't make the decision there, so basically if they disapprove VanEck, they can't delay it anymore. It's the final deadline. So they have to just say yes or no. And if it's a no, it means everything's getting a no. If it's a yes, probably they make everything a yes. And so I think just like over the last few months, there was all these meetings with the SEC and they kept having to refile and make adjustments to their filing. If the ETH ETF is going to be a thing, we're going to see that over the next coming months with the final deadline, May 23rd. And so likely what happens is people start speculating on that. If it looks like it might get approved, ETH is going to have a run up just like what Bitcoin had. And I think the ETH Bitcoin chart is domination by ETH in this coming few months. Now, maybe it doesn't get approved. I think one thing to keep in mind is Bitcoin had the benefit of Grayscale going to court for it and with its trying to convert its GBTC. And so it actually had the court saying, hey, you need to go and reevaluate the Bitcoin spot ETF. We don't have that precedent with ETH. Now, technically, ETH has a futures ETF, it's been approved already. So a lot of people are saying, well, because that's approved, there's no reason the spot Bitcoin or spot ETH ETF won't get approved, which I think holds some merit. It's not the exact same setup as Bitcoin. We also know that Gary Gensler is more of a fan of Bitcoin, not so much a fan of smart contract platforms. There's definitely more risk in a smart contract platform than something like Bitcoin. So I'm not super confident that the ETH ETF gets approved. It is a prediction of mine that I said it would. I think there is a lot more nuances in this one. And so it's less of a certainty like the Bitcoin one was. There's also the idea that Bitcoin isn't a massive competition to the financial world, right? You can approve it and it just sort of exists. There's not DeFi that's built on top of it. There's not stable coins. It's not in like a massive competition to, let's say, like banks and the payment system, etc. Obviously, it is a store of value. And so similar to gold, it does have some sort of competition to the traditional investing world, traditional finance world, but not as much as something like Ethereum and other smart contract platforms do, where there's literally banks being built on top of the platform. There's stable coins and there's all these other assets. I don't know that the US is ready to allow that to become more mainstream. So anyway, I'm just not sure where this is going to go, but let's see what happens over the coming months. If it looks like it's going to get approved and the percentages are high, ETH is going to go on a massive run for that. But even without that, I think with the upgrades coming to Ethereum in February, which is EIP 4844, which is basically going to make the fees on the L2s of Ethereum go down by an order of magnitude, so by at least 10x. I think this is going to be a massive catalyst for Ethereum in the coming months. And so that, with the speculation of the ETF, should be what makes ETH, I think, move this quarter. So I think Bitcoin it'll probably grind upwards, especially if Ethereum is like ripping upwards. Then Bitcoin's not going to just sit there and do nothing. but I think ETH will be the main driver in Q1 2024. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. I think ETH L2s also do quite well. I've talked about that a lot. Now, what does that mean for other alt L1s? If we look at the Sol ETH chart, which is what I have up on the screen, I mean, during the bear market, ETH dominated Sol. And then, of course, 2023, Sol just went on an absolute tear, and it's just completely dominated, taking back almost all of its losses that it had over the bear market and basically reaching the top that it was back in, March 2022. And so it reached all the way up to the 0.055 was the Sol ETH chart. But since then, which that topped out around the end of December, ETH has actually been outperforming Solana since about Christmas, pretty much. And so it's been down only since then. And so now, what do I expect? This one's a tougher one to say short term. I do think that this cycle, Solana continues to outperform ETH just because it's so much smaller. I mean, I think Solana's market cap is around like 40 billion, if not less than that, maybe 35 billion, whereas Ethereum is 300 billion, right? It's way bigger. But I do think that Ethereum continues to outperform in the short term, especially with this idea of EIP 444 happening and then the ETF. And especially if the ETF is approved, then I think Ethereum outperforms for a little bit here and goes on a big run. But we'll see what happens with that. Look, I think Solana continues to do well. This is why I continue to say I think you should hold both Solana and Ethereum. But I do think Ethereum has a bit more run in it. I have a line here on the chart which puts the Sol ETH chart at 0.033 in terms of its next support line. So I think maybe Solana can get down to that point. At that point, it might be a good idea if you have some extra ETH to rotate it into Solana, and then we'll see Solana start to outperform at some point again. I just don't think this outperformance of Ethereum is done just yet, but let's see where things go. The thing about Solana is there are some catalysts for Solana. I mean, lots of airdrops, of course. I think a lot of that's starting to already be priced in, though. There's the Fire Dancer upgrade coming in the summer, which is going to make its TPS massive. The problem is there's just not enough demand actually on Solana for that TPS to matter too much yet. But of course, you can speculate around that. So I think Solana will continue to do well on that front. The main thing I'm seeing is, and I'm going to talk about TIA, Celestia in just a second here, but I see this with a lot of the alt L1s, is everyone's just airdrop farming. And so a lot of these numbers are so inflated. And so everyone is holding onto these tokens, they're staking them, and they're putting them in DeFi protocols. So no one's really selling their Sol. They're not selling their TIA. There's just not any new demand at the moment because there's just no new people coming in the space. And then institutional demand is more around, I mean, they bought Sol early 2023, but they're probably going to be focused on Bitcoin for the next little bit, and then maybe ETH as its ETF comes in. Now, there's still tons of retail demand, so I think Sol is going to do amazing. As a short-term catalyst, I don't know what that is just yet, unless a bunch of these airdrops actually launch and a bunch of liquidity comes in, then maybe we see a run there. I'm not quite sure yet. So still up in the air on where that goes. Let's talk Celestia, and then I'll give my overall thesis on where things go. The one asset that has continued to outperform through all this, Solana has kind of chilled for the last almost a month now, hasn't done much. ETH has done quite well just in the last week. And then everything else has kind of just chilled out. Celestia, though, TIA, has just absolutely been on a tear. This thing launched back in October. It did an airdrop around $3, I believe it was. Yeah, $2. And since then, it's been basically up only. It's now sitting at almost $20, which is pretty crazy. It's been on an absolute tear. So what's going on here? A lot of people are wondering, should they be investing in Celestia? Should they be buying TIA right now? It is the new data availability layer that a lot of L2s might move to get lower costs. It's got about a lot of hype right now. The other big reason that TIA is doing so well, outside of just people thinking DA has value, it's more because there is the opportunity that if you buy TIA, you stake it, you can farm a bunch of airdrops. So there's the DIM airdrop that's coming, which is Dimension, which if you were just staking a bit of your Celestia, you would get this airdrop. There's been a bunch of others that are included in this as well. So a lot of people are now speculating that, hey, kind of like the Sega phone that happened, if I hold this, I stake it, I'm going to get a bunch of airdrops. And so what's happened over the last few weeks is a lot of retail people have been buying TIA, staking it, and hoping to get some airdrops. And while I think there's still probably tons of room left for TIA to run throughout this cycle, we got to understand that its fully diluted valuation right now is almost 20 million, which is, more than half of what Solana's market cap is. Seems a little bit toppy to me. It seems a bit aggressive for something that just launched in October. It's very, very new. But hey, in bull markets, these things can go, just outrageous, overpriced. So like, I'm not saying this is the top by any means. What I want to warn people of is at some point, remember, this isn't speculation because people want to buy this token and use it for gas like ETH or Solana needs, or they want to buy it to lock up in specific DeFi protocols to take out loans and stuff. This is people buying this token only to farm airdrops, right? Other than that, the value isn't really there yet on this, and the need to hold this token is fully because of airdrops, except for some people that are, building on this on Celestia, et cetera. But like, that's not a massive, massive, massive amount. And so what we need to understand is at some point, this will unfold and unwind. At some point, people are going to start selling Celestia. But you got to remember that if you stake Celestia, TIA, it takes 21 days for that to unstake. And so once we get, it's probably going to keep going up because there's still a lot more airdrops to go. And so more people are figuring this out. But at some point, big holders, the whales, are going to be like, okay, it's time for me to sell because there's no airdrops left. Or there may be a few airdrops left, but it doesn't outweigh the reason to actually hold the token anymore, right? And so once they start to unwind and sell, everyone's going to be FOMOing to get out of this trade. And so it's a bit of a different trade than others because everything is being staked right now. That's why this price is going so much. There's no one selling because they literally can't. And because they're all speculating on this airdrops coming. So we got to keep an eye on like, when do these airdrops start to slow down and become less valuable? And what I mean is at some point, there will be just not enough applications launching tokens. But before that, what's going to happen is most of the airdrops will become less valuable because too many people will be farming them. So they actually get diluted. Whenever that hits, that's when you need to make sure you get out. So I'm not saying buy or don't buy. I'm definitely not saying you need to sell right now. I don't think TIA is going to dump. You just need to be aware and you need to front run the others because right now it's sort of this speculative supply crunch that's happening on TIA that just it will not last throughout the bull market. So that's my warning to everyone. I don't hold any TIA. I got the airdrop, but I unfortunately sold it. That sucks. I could have 5-6x that. If I would have just held on to it, I guess 8x that. So I'm not happy about that. But anyway, just something to be aware of. I don't know when that top comes. I'll try to keep an eye and let you guys know for those that are staking this. For now, probably a great deal. You're probably going to get a bunch of airdrops. I just don't know how worth it that's going to be. Here's what you need to understand, right? And this is how you can figure this stuff out. Just go on Twitter and type in TIA in Twitter in the search menu. And here's what you can see. This is how you know so many people are farming this. Here's accounts that are saying, okay, I staked TIA. Now what? I was told I would get airdrops tokens. So what gives? Where's my stuff? Right? Here's another one. Stake TIA today. Which airdrop could I qualify for? Is it too late for DIM? It's way too late. Anyone who knows what they're doing knows that. I just added 3 more TIA wallets with 20 staked and 10 liquid staked each airdrop season. So this is one person who has 3 wallets, and that's adding more, right? They had a bunch of others, they said, with 20 staked each. So there's 60 TIA just in these 3 wallets. So one person holds, however many, at least 3 wallets. What do you think they're going to do once they've got enough tokens that they've received from airdrops? They're not long-term holders. These aren't people that are like want to fight through the bear market because they believe in this community. They're just people that are farming some airdrops. In fact, they have the Optimism logo in their Twitter handle. So obviously they're not a diehard Celestia fan. Here's another one. If Manta doesn't do an airdrop for TIA stakers, I will drop my 1.73 TIA that I staked. Manta Network, you are warned, right? So these are a bunch of retail people that are trying to farm airdrops that are buying this token, staking it. I mean, it's 1.73. This is nothing. I don't even know why they would expect anything from that. But this is what I mean. The list is, I could show you hundreds of these. And so what I'm saying is this is not institutions buying TIA right now. It's a bunch of retail that are buying and staking to farm. And that never ends well. So just be very, very careful. We've seen this happen many times. There was the 3,3 club back in the day where it was this OHM token that the more people who bought it and staked it, the more it went up. But at some point, someone was like, I'm out. And then a bunch of people rushed to get out and the token went next to zero. I don't think TIA goes to zero because it's a legit product. I just think it's way overvalued already. And that probably continues. And at some point, people are going to get hurt. So anyway, that's just something for people to keep in mind on what's happening in the cycle and why TIA is likely going up right now. Okay, so where do things go? What's my thoughts over the next couple months? As I said, I think Bitcoin probably grinds up a little bit here whenever the demand kicks in. I don't know when that demand hits. And so if that demand doesn't come sooner than later, maybe we market dump for a little bit. We're still pretty high up. I mean, Bitcoin at 43,000. We've been sitting there. We haven't gone lower in a while. So like maybe we get back into the 30,000s. If it is, it's just a time to buy. It shouldn't be, I don't think it's a long sellout or anything like that. I think it's quick, but maybe we have that just again, people rotating out of their Bitcoin trade. But again, we might not see that. And so if we don't see that, I think ETH really catches a narrative here with EIP 4844 as well as the potential ETF. And so I think ETH really outperforms Bitcoin. If it doesn't dump and ETH doesn't dump, then Bitcoin probably grinds up as well. So you do well in that. Solana, same thing, probably grinds along with Ethereum, but it might outperform it. So again, I hold both. I stake both. I'm airdrop farming with both. You can watch my Market Watch video last week on how to do that. And then as for all the other alt L1s, just remember that these are just crypto natives and like pro traders in the space that are jumping around trying to buy the one that is like has the fairest value or the lowest valuation. Sui, for example, is the one that's really pumping right now because it's the other fast alt L1 that hadn't caught a huge bid. So it's done really well over the last week, whereas some others have sort of just chilled out and not done as well. So it's a tougher market right now to be trading assets because it's just hard to say what's going to outperform. It just depends on narratives and what traders are going to do. So for most of us who are not like daily traders, I would be accumulating ETH right now. I'd be accumulating SOL right now. I'm farming airdrops just for fun, but not in a very risky way. And I'm just waiting for the next leg up, which I think may happen in Q1. If it doesn't happen here, it's definitely going to happen in Q2 off the back of macro, which is probably the inflation continues to go down and interest rates start to drop in Q2. And that's the next leg up. And then we get into the elections and probably a lot more money printing in the second half of 2024. So, you know, the rest of the year, definitely bullish. I just don't know exactly in this quarter, which is why I wanted to make this video. It could go either way. And so again, just use this as an accumulation phase. Don't get scared if prices do go down, but otherwise expect everything after Bitcoin on the risk curve to outperform here on. That's it. If you have other questions for me, please put in the comments here on YouTube or on Spotify. Put in the comments, what other assets do you want me to talk about? What other narratives do you want me to dissect? What other questions do you have? Please let me know. That's what this Market Watch episode is for, is to really just dive into what's happening across all markets. And so I want to help, answer questions that you guys have. So feel free to put those in YouTube and Spotify or in our Discord if you happen to be in there. And I will cover them in my next Market Watch episodes. Friends, thanks so much for joining me today. Again, please subscribe and comment below. That helps us grow. And I will see you in the weekly roll-up coming at the end of the week. Take care, friends. Thank you for listening to Web3 Academy, your one trusted source to capitalize on the next big phase of the internet. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it and subscribe or follow so that you don't miss the next one. While you're at it, there's a link in the description for our free newsletter where we provide timely and relevant Web3 insights so you can confidently build and invest in Web3. Make sure to subscribe today. One final note. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and nothing we say is financial advice. Crypto and Web3 are risky, and you should never invest more than you're willing to lose. Thank you, friends, and see you in the next one.